a filmmaker and educator living in Los Angeles, whose work explores the narrative possibilities found in animal, protagonist, documentary, play, and collective ownership. His films and games have exhibited in numerous venues, including the Museum of Modern Art, SFIAAFF, Ars Electronica, Slam Dance, Indiecade, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, The Kitchen, and the Telluride Film Festival. Peter did game direction, design, story, sound design, and programming while collaborating with Kuro Shivaliniad for the game The Cat and the Coup, which is on exhibit here.
Okay, so I'm going to sort of talk about what I think of documentary games and what that means as we're still figuring out what the world that category might mean, by way of telling you why and how and what I made The Cat and the Coup, which is part of this exhibit. So when thinking about games and what they can do, you have what are some expressive opportunities? What are some ways in which games can be expressive that are somewhat unique? You have the rules that the developer made, you have the role that the person plays, and you have the interactivity. So rules are, what you're asked to do or constrained to do, or what rules can you break as a player. The role I think is an interesting one, and I kind of want to play it up as a bit of focus for me, is not just what character do you play in a game, but what cultural and personal questions do you ask as a player when you're put in this position. This is particularly salient for documentary games, because let's say a documentary game is about something you're not connected to apparently. Well, what does it mean to then definitely put you in it? And finally, interactivity in a short way is what you do in the game, what choices do you make? And these aren't the only components of games. Of course, image, sound, motion, space are also really important, but possibly not quite as unique to video games. And so I, a few years ago, set out to make The Cat and the Coup, and before I knew what I wanted to do with it, I knew I wanted it to be about the first democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran. I discovered him, found him really interesting, and I thought it reflected very importantly on the wars that are going on now. But that sounds good, but how to figure out how to do that. So I started looking at a lot of stuff out there. And so I think when games work, one way to ask a question about what are good about documentary games. Games in general, abstractly, are these activities that ask you to follow some rules and to figure out the patterns that manifest and to struggle through this project. More than most media, or any media, they really put you to work. And that's all games, right? And if you can couple that with a topic that's not abstract, then you already have yourself sort of a ready-made activity to get someone to really struggle with something they may be interested in. I mean, mentally, literally on the computer, try to work through a topic. And that seems like a really good opportunity for documentary broadly. And so I look at games like, you guys might have heard of the McDonald's game, which is a really cool example of diving into making this sort of a system game about McDonald's. And I found this sort of a critique and having nice play, but I said to myself, I want to make a game where people don't know anything about Mohammad Mossadegh, this Prime Minister of Iran. Going into this game, you probably know something about McDonald's, and so that helps you, ground you. And so that was probably my biggest difficulty, is saying, I want to make a short game about something that you probably know nothing about. So where do I ground them? Where do I begin? And it's worth talking about that, since we're talking at a film festival, that this idea of the word realistic is something you have to throw away. And people often try to be realistic when making something like a documentary. But filmmakers realized a long time ago that the photograph, just trying to define realistic without using the word real, it can be really hard to do. And so let's just throw it out. And that includes, this documentary filmmakers abandoned the idea of authenticity decades ago, where if I can just be a fly on the wall, capture the referent, I won't put any voiceover in there, and it'll be exactly how it really is. And that's just a myth that's been let go. And so as game developers, we need to be sure to let it go as well. And for example, so I want to make a game about history. So most history games are about World War II. And they work partly because I know who the good guys are, and I know what happened, and generally, and so that isn't a very good influence for me. In fact, this game, Company of Heroes, that year was reviewed as the most realistic game of the year. And so, separately, we have games that are sort of the what-if game. So this game, you can make decisions about World War II and end up with different outcomes that than really happen. And that's interesting, that's exciting. You can make Germany successfully invade England. And that helps you maybe learn about history. But that only works if I know what really happened. It's only interesting as an alternative if I know the original. So that's disorienting. And the what-if scenario is not unique to games. If you know a lot about Spider-Man, then it might be interesting to ask, what if Spider-Man was in the Fantastic Four? Again, if you know the original, then the alternative is exciting. And I do think there's something exciting about games as pointing out alternative outcomes. But I'm interested in asking questions about role. Remember I said rules, role, and interactivity. And some of you guys might know this game, JFK Reloaded, in which it starts, it says you're in Dallas in 1963, and it just, bam, it starts, and you can move your gun around, you can look around, JFK's motorcade comes by, and really all you can do is shoot at him. And then it's over, and it evaluates how accurately you recreate history. So to get past the gratuity for a second, it puts you in this actually clearly interesting position, this interesting role above the interactivity and the rules. And what it does is it evaluates how accurately you recreate history. It gives you a score, and all the scores were uploaded to their site, and tens of thousands of people played it, and it turned out the best player in the world still didn't recreate history accurately. And so it asked the question, what was the truth? And for me, JFK was one of those things where I just wasn't born at the right time. I didn't actually care about him deeply. But after playing this, I was freaked out that I felt obligated to form an opinion about what I thought about this, whether I thought the current encyclopedia version of the story was what I believe, or I thought I'm a complete so-called conspiracy theorist. I don't know, but I had to figure it out. And this game didn't necessarily answer it for me, but it made me feel emotional about it. And just to go, I got to blast through. So a common role or a common solution to this question of like, who are you in this story, is to use journalism as the character. So in this game, Global Conflicts Palestine, you're a journalist on the Israeli border, and you're literally moving around and getting quotes from people so that you can put it into a newspaper, and you're evaluated on how good your article is. And this is just a very good solution to, instead of make you a character like, say, a Palestinian woman who's going through some struggle, instead of being her, you interview her. So this is a very common solution, including a game like Pictures for Truth does a similar thing. Okay, but we're in a hurry. So I'm going to show you just a little bit of the cat in the coop so I can talk about it. And I told you, so the solution was to make it about Mohammed Mossadegh's cat. And that is an interesting role because it's fictional, and it's not about alternative outcomes. And it's hopefully is a solution for a topic in which you don't know, and it admits, I think, wears on its sleeve that art is subjective, and this documentary is just a version of the truth. And so the first thing you'll notice is my collaborator's art, Kurosh Valinejad. He's directly influenced by Persian miniatures. And so in the game, you coax Mossadegh out of different rooms by doing things like knocking his clock into the other room when he goes after it, by coaxing him into opening a door for you. And each room represents a different important period of his life. And it's highlighted by the text you see. And you see the date at the top. And so what you learn as you play is that you're going backwards in time from his death to the day he was elected prime minister. And each room is like a puzzle where you try to figure out what to do. It's a game. And the texts, incidentally, are from like respected newspapers and whatnot from the United States at the time. That's important. Like the New York Times, for example. Okay, so then I'm going to skip ahead. You go through various puzzles and worlds, and a lot of them are couched in these metaphors And frankly, you don't quite know what's going on when you're playing it. You know, you're getting pieces and bits, and you understand this is where he was influenced by the CIA, etc. But what happens is, at the end, you beat it, and you play through this big canvas. And when you get to the end, the world fills up with oil. And you go back through that same world. There's no cuts or fades or anything like that. But this time, the metaphors have been stripped away, and we see actual photographs from the time. The text is changed. The texts are from various sources that are more retrospective. In other words, they weren't written exactly at the time, but with the benefit of some new information. And finally, because we were playing down, we were going backwards in time. Now that we're going up, we're going forwards in time. And that respects a recognition that I think a lot of us learn history moving backwards, but we understand it moving forwards. And so, yeah, okay. You can play it over there, and we're going to release it in June. So,
you talked in the beginning about games falling into these categories with skill and chance and strategy. Did you try to angle your game towards one of those, or a mix, or what was your thinking about those?
Interesting. What were they games?
Skills, chance, strategy, and labor. Those were my
Yeah, it definitely had a little bit of strategy as you're trying to deal with puzzles. It's sort of like a puzzle game. It definitely didn't have to do with skill. Every day I worked on this, I made it easier to play. And that had to do with that I hope some non-gamers play this. And just enough difficulty that you struggle through it, but you can't die and you can't be put backwards. So every puzzle, the 6 puzzles, there's 2 things you do. So like, you'll do one thing and then you have a couple seconds or moments to do the second thing, and if you don't do it in time, then you're back to this stage. But that's not a huge punishment, right? Which is a very common game thing to do, like 2 things in a row and then you're successful, otherwise you have to try them both again. So yeah.
Oh yeah.
Is there like a precedent of like, you know how like Hollywood films have licensed products of video games, like, that transferring on a video game? Like, any how about documentaries? Do they have like, is there like a precedent of having a documentary game or a traditional film documentary?
Yeah, maybe you guys know. I think that's a great.
Yeah.
I hope so. I want there to be.
Yeah.
I think there's an excellent opportunity, as long as they don't. Maybe the game isn't subservient to the. Maybe it's smaller than the film, in scope and everything, and audience and budget and all that. But it would really be nice if they're sort of siblings, rather than a conversion of the movie, just for the sake of both of them.
Don't docs not make money though? Right? Kind of. So it's like hard to make a game probably compared to
Well,
transfer.
because it's a smaller scale, it's what, even for an iPhone or something like that,
It costs a lot.
And there's an interesting example, like right over here, I think Climbing Sacred Mountain is both a documentary film.
Yeah, Cam's actually developing a game based on Satya documentary Daughters of Everest, about the first Nepali women's expedition up Mount Everest. So it didn't happen concurrently, but it's related to a documentary.
But there is a real, I mean, if you look at influences and precedent, I mean, your example is very good. The idea that you're making a game about something that exists outside the game. That can be fiction. It can be a Simpsons game, or it can be the real world.
Right.
Absolutely. So that's great.